And I strongly disagree with Freddie's assessment that the American people want this election to be over with. It's quite the opposite. You had 73 million people voting for Donald J. Trump, and all of these people right now are being gaslit by the media. There was once upon a time where the media would tell the people's story, right? So right now we've just had the media telling their own version of events, not speaking to any Americans who are presenting tons of evidence. They send it to me of their own ballots not being cast, not being counted. People showing you that their dead relatives have voted in this election. This was one of the most insane elections that we've ever had. Mind you, the media, the very same media who prepped us all year saying that this election, we're not going to figure out the results. It's going to be unlike any election we've ever had because of COVID-19 and mail-in ballots. It's going to take weeks and weeks and weeks for us to be able to count. Now, that same exact media is saying, well, never mind, Trump just needs to concede. And we had an election where we all went to bed at 2 a.m. Trump was winning by a lot. And then suddenly we woke up and we were told that the exact opposite had happened. They stopped counting and suddenly there was a massive dump of ballots and Joe Biden was in the lead. Everything about this feels fraudulent. And to say you should just certify the election because the media is ready to move on, which is what we're really getting at. The media is ready to move on. The media has been ready to move on from Trump, honestly, since he won in 2016. Right. If we're talking about the word fraud and you're reducing it down to the word fraud, what we have realized is that these errors that seem to be happening, these accidental errors where they transfer votes from Trump to Joe Biden, only seem to be happening one way. So whether you want to say it was human error, which is what the Dominion Voting Systems is arguing at this point in America, that it was all human error and something happened and someone pressed the wrong button, fine. But the results are fraudulent to the American people. You cannot just move on when 73 million people do not trust the election process and do not trust the votes. And it was done in a year where you transformed the election process. You guys don't do this in the UK. You guys don't calculate and do an electronic system. They don't do this in Canada. They forced this. No. They forced this in America because of COVID-19. And if you go back and look at my rhetoric, the Dominion Voting System is saying it was a human error, and Sidney Powell and Trump's campaign is saying it was not a human error, that the system was designed to be able to do this. And this is what he's talking about when Sidney Powell is saying that they have more evidence that they're willing to present. And rather than allow them and afford them the right to do this, the entire mainstream media is saying just move on. It's not here. Why not just allow them? This is what our system allows for. Allow the due process to go through. Why are we trying to sweep this under the rug and move on and say, well, we don't have any evidence yet, so it needs to be closed? Again, this is the same media that told us this election was going to take months and months and months to count, including Joe Biden himself. Joe Biden, Hillary Clinton boldly said that Joe Biden, if he lost, should not concede. So I don't understand how the media can then just flip and say, you know what, the exact opposite, and gaslight all of the American people who they've been conditioning to believe that this election was going to take months to transform. To call.
Okay.
I would hope he would run again. I don't think that any person, this is going to be a bad election result no matter what, because as you're seeing in recent polling, there are 73 million people who do not believe that this election was executed in good faith. And we have been saying this since long before the election. I've been saying this since March. The idea of transforming the entire election system in 1 year and expecting states to be able to do with this and having so many people's voices censored, right? People that are speaking out about their own election fraud stories are right now being censored by the big tech. I just don't think it's going to be a very testy time in America, and it already has been for the last 4 years. So perhaps he will run. If he did, obviously, I would support him. I think he should. But it's wrong. And I'll tell you what is fraudulent is all of the mainstream media and the tech people calling President Biden, calling former Vice President Biden the president-elect. That is incorrect. Right. It is wrong language. He should be called a presidential candidate. This election has not been called by the states.
Okay.
The GOP has completely changed. It's no longer the establishment Republican Party. And when I say that, I'm talking about the John McCain Republican Party. It's completely transformed over the last 4 years for the better. It's become more inclusive, which you can see by looking at the early exit polling numbers. Hispanics largely, and I think 36% voted for Donald J. Trump this election. Black women doubled their support for Donald Trump. Black men voted 18% for Trump. So despite all of the rhetoric of trying to smear and libel him as a racist, the party has actually become incredibly more inclusive. And that's in large part because Donald J. Trump was a more cultural figure. What I mean by that is that he was able to communicate his message in a more effective way, and he felt more attainable to the American people. And I get that he's a boisterous, busty billionaire from New York, but he does, when he speaks to people, he's very much a blue collar and able to relate to them in a different way. There are a lot of different elements of Trump. So if you're talking about just being a person who, doesn't balk when the mainstream media is on their backs, somebody like Ron DeSantis, right? I mean, he has stood firm in the COVID-19. Kristi Noem in South Dakota has stood firm on her policies despite the media creating a pressure campaign against her on COVID-19. What we're really talking about is someone who does not bend to the will of the mainstream media, because the mainstream media does not represent Americans at this moment. And I would even go so far as to say the mainstream media doesn't represent people in the UK as well. So I think the Republican Party has actually never been more united. And there was definitely a fracturing when he first hit the stage in 2015. And there were many people, the Never Trump parade, and Republicans who did not stand behind him, but all of those Republicans stood behind him this election cycle. Despite, I won't say mainstream media, but despite depictions, the Republican Party is actually very much together in this moment, and I don't think anybody wants to go backwards.
Socialism appeared to collapse at the end of the last century. In the 20th century, socialism flourished at the beginning. In fact, it covered about 60% of all the real estate in the planet. All the big countries, Russia, China, India, were under the socialist thumb. And then at the end of the century, boom, it all went down. Reagan said we had put socialism on the ash heap of history. And I thought so too. And so the revival of socialism in the 21st century is surely an event of great importance. In fact, socialism has never been in the mainstream of American history. There have been socialist candidates in the past, guys like Eugene Debs, a fellow named Norman Thomas, but they were always marginalized. Now, not just with Bernie Sanders or Ocasio-Cortez, but with the mainstream of the Democratic Party embracing socialist ideas, socialism is in the forefront in a way it's never been before. So that requires explanation. I think the short answer is we're dealing with a new type of socialism. The socialists say today, no, we're not trying to replicate the socialism of Mao or Stalin or Lenin. Our socialism is new in key respects. We're trying to essentially do what previous socialisms failed to do.
Yeah, previous socialisms failed, meaning 100 million people have been killed under socialist regimes in the last 100 years, and yet they think that they can somehow replicate it and make it better.
Yeah, you may. It's almost like socialism means never having to say you're sorry.
Right.
You can forget about history. You can erase history. You can start anew. Here's my point. Socialism is, in fact, the most discredited idea since slavery. The great thinkers on socialism, from Hayek to Solzhenitsyn and others, have always seen socialism as a form of slavery. That's why Hayek's book is called The Road to Serfdom. And yet, if someone were to say about slavery, you know what, it was kind of a good idea, but the implementation was always flawed. This time we're going to get it right. Most people would think that person was clinically insane. Yet, this is exactly what people say about socialism. They say, hey, we've tried and failed, but you know what? This time we're going to make it work. And I think that there's a certain kind of craziness in socialism, the ideas and the tactics, and we're seeing it all around us.
Right. We're seeing it all around us, but we are especially seeing it being perpetuated by young people. Young people really believe that this can work. It's like a socialist is it is a form of idealism. It's great on paper. I mean, who doesn't want everything to be free? Of course, you can turn around to a 4-year-old and say, how should the world run? And they'd say, everything should be free. Nobody should have to work. It's a great idea on paper, but it doesn't work. So my question is, how are so many young people not aware of not just our modern socialist history, but our socialist present? What's presently happening in Venezuela? That is what sort of boggles my mind.
So the socialism that we're pursuing is, in fact, the socialism of Venezuela. There are close parallels between Venezuelan socialism and American socialism. However, the official doctrine of the left here is to deny that, and is to say the socialism that they're pursuing, they say, is the socialism of Scandinavia. So they say, look, we know that Venezuela is in a miserable state, but that's not what we're doing. We like the way people live in Norway and Sweden. it's not that bad to live over there, is it? So why don't we import that form of socialism here? Now, the key thing to realize is that with the Scandinavians, they are actually capitalist in wealth creation, socialist in wealth distribution. Now, on the wealth creation side, they never kill the goose that lays the golden eggs. They have low corporate tax rates, about 20%, same as here. They have no minimum wage. They have less regulation. You can actually hire and fire people for any reason. They have no wealth tax, with one exception. They have no inheritance tax. The kind of financial transaction fees that Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren have proposed for America, that exists in no Scandinavian country. One Scandinavian country, Finland, tried the universal basic income. It didn't work. They got rid of it. So the Scandinavians are actually, they want to create a big pie. Now, when they distribute it, and here is the key point, they impose the burden on the whole society. So they have high tax rates on the middle class, typically 50%. In Sweden, if you make $70,000, you start off by turning half of that, $35,000, to the government. So they don't practice this politics of demonizing the rich. The rich will pay. I'm going to rob Peter to pay Paul so I can get Paul's vote. The Scandinavians don't do that. So the truth of it is that the American left says we want to be like Scandinavia, but they don't want to follow the Scandinavian model.